And back here is the thrashing machine. Now, there would be someone whose business it was to own a thrashing machine, and then he would go farm by farm and do the thrashing for the farmer. And what they would do is they would exchange work among the neighbors. So my father would work for 4 or 5 other farmers, and they would in turn would work for him, help him in the thrashing season. And after a while, because there were so few thrashing machines around that the farmers had to wait, sometimes they figured too long, and the oats would not be at top
Quality.
Quality, either one. And so my father bought his own thrashing machine, and then he went around and did thrashing. And when he owned the thrashing machine, he still needed somebody to come, he still needed neighbors to come in and help him. So he still needed somebody to exchange work with them, and that was me. So I would go around in place of my father to the various farms to help with thrashing. And generally what my job was just to drive the tractor around through the fields, a tractor with a wagon on the back, and then a couple of men would throw stooks of oats on the wagon. And I would drive around until that wagon was full. In the meantime, some other person had driven another empty wagon and tractor out into the field, and we would switch. I would take the empty wagon and tractor, and he would take the full one and take it back up to the barn. And what they would do is then you'd need a couple of men to throw the bundles of oats up in here. I don't know exactly where they would have thrown it. And you can see these wheels. They would have been hooked up to a tractor to run this. And the oats would go in, and the whole machine would go shake, 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 shake. So the oats would drop out, and a man would be standing with a bag of oats, and until that bag of oats got full. And then they'd tie it off, and another man would come along, throw it over his shoulder, and walk to the granary and empty the oats into the granary, bag by bag. So you can see that was physically hard. And then the straw, after the oats had been knocked out, the straw would go through that big tube up there, and that would be blown into the second story of the barn to be used for bedding for the winter. And it was the women's job to produce a huge feast, like feeding thrashers. You can see it was very hot, hard work. And so the men would come in about noon, and they'd be starved. And we would set up a water basin and a pitcher and a towel outdoors so they could wash their hands and face. And then we would have a huge table set up for them, and we would have probably ham and beef, and we'd have potatoes, and always there was corn, because this would have been corn season. And then you'd have pies and cakes, mashed potatoes, did I say that? And whatever vegetables were in season at that time. And the men would eat, and they would take an hour off, and they'd end up laying down in the yard, resting themselves and so on. And then probably about 1 o'clock, they go back at it again, go back into the fields. And as I recall, the only thing they had to drink was beer in the fields. I say that because I drank beer with the men in the fields. And the worst headache I ever had was one of those days where it was really, really, really hot, probably well into the 90s. And the only thing I had to drink was beer.
How old would you have been?
I would have been, I don't know. I must have started this. My father died when I was 18. I was in college. I probably was like 14, 15, maybe even 13, somewhere in there, that I was exchanging work with the rest of the farmers. And they seemed to accept me. There weren't any other women or girls around working out in the fields with the men, but I had started out when I was 7, working with my father, and so it was perfectly natural.